record on this computer. Beautiful. All right, everyone. Welcome back to the last lecture of today. This is where everything is. I moved a little bit of the README around. I kind of moved the Thunk middleware section into its own section and dropped the combined reducers part down at the bottom. But this is all on your GitHub repo right now as well. So, and it looks a little something like this. We are running it. This is what it looks like. I refresh on this page. You will see the same thing. Nothing has changed. All these cute little monsters. And what we are going to walk through now is a problem that we will come across as our Redux store state gets larger and as we build out more action creators, whether they be Thunk creators or whether they be regular action creators. As we continue to build, this file will continue to be larger. And the same way that we have moved all of our individual components into their own files, the same way that we now have express.router to modularize all of our routes and also our DB models into all of their own files, we are going to do the same thing with Redux, with the Redux store. All right. So we are going to do that through combine reducers, Today, we are going to cover what combine reducers is. It's imported from Redux. We are going to split up this one reducer that we have down here into two sub-reducers or smaller reducers into two new files. And then we're going to make use of combine reducers to connect them into a mega reducer that our store uses. The resulting state is still going to be the same, which means that this shouldn't have to change. After that, we'll talk a little bit about what happens if it takes us a while to make an Axios call, but we'll talk about that in a second, called loading state. All right. Oh, right. So combine reducers is a named export from Redux right here. And I'm going to drop this down here. Combine reducers is a named export from Redux and accepts an object that looks suspiciously like our initial state. So it would be something like this. There we go. It's a named export and a function. So we would say const large reducer is equal to combine reducers, which is a function that accepts an object, and the keys of the object are going to be the keys of our store state. The values of the object are reducers, sub-reducers, that return the data type our store state wants for that key. Okay. What does that mean? So this is still also going to take monsters and selected monster. And inside of here, it's going to accept a subreducer. So it's going to accept a monsters subreducer. And separately, a selected monster reducer. So these are smaller reducers that our functions are going to become. And I can actually hide this away for us because this is what we are going to build. This is what we are going to build. This resulting reducer gets sent to our store, to our function create store. So this is now going to become the main reducer and replace this down here. So this is all going to be refactored. We are performing some refactoring right now. So let's do that together. I'm going to hide this away. I don't think we need this. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to add some files. I'm going to add a separate one for monsters and one more for selected monster.js. The reason I am adding 2 files is so that our entire initial state can be split up and partitioned into their own files that will handle the isolated experience of what it means to have a monsters array and the isolated experience of changing the selected monsters object. So let's do that. We are going to move all of the information for monsters in here. Can anyone, and that's going to include all of our action type constants, action creators, and functions. And we will build a separate, smaller reducer in here and export it. So what from my index.js file do I need to move over into monsters.js? Into monsters.js. What do I need to move from my index.js into monsters.js? Line 24. Yes, I love it. Just give me line numbers. Yes, I need to get my got monsters. I need to move that in here. What else do I need to move? Yes, every time we create new files, we are making a book with their code. Yes, every folder is its own book and every index.js is its own table of contents. All right, what else do I need to move into monsters.js? What affects monsters.js? Monsters.js. Yeah, 52. Yep, got monsters. So this belongs in here. What else belongs in here? Our thunk creator. Yeah, our entire thunk creator also lives in here. So I'll move all of this information in here because it affects and calls got monsters. And also since our thunk creator's in here, we also need to add in Axios in here as well. Yeah. Our initial state, we actually will no longer be needing this because we will be building it from here instead. So we're adding action type constants, action creators, and thunk creators that relate to monsters, and we have to make the reducer for it. So I'm going to export default this reducer function. We can call this monster reducer, which accepts a state and an action and does something in here. All right. So what are we doing in here? What does this monster reducer look like? This is what this monster reducer will be importing. So what we export from here, this entire file will be the reducer that gets placed into combined reducers. Let me just import all of these. Monsters reducer from monsters, and also import selected monster reducer from selected monster. Okay. So this function here, this reducer function, is the subreducer that will return the same data type as whatever data type our key should have. So here in our initial state, we want monsters to be an array, which means what should monster reducer's default state look like? Also an array, correct. Also an array. So all of our sub reducers will no longer be returning only an object we may end up having different data types because we will be joining these reducers into one giant one that handles the large initial state for us. Questions about where we have come so far, I have removed all of the information related to monsters, put them into a separate file, and I want to make a smaller reducer whose job is to just handle my monsters. Just handle my monsters. So if I go down here, which one of these action types, yes, which with the case of, gee, how did you answer my question before, whoa. I was going to say, which one of these action types are we going to need to place into this reducer? It's fine, G. It's going to be this one. Fine. Remember that all of our reducer functions should start with our switch case on its type, and we'll always have some default value that returns the current state, right? This is going to be the default for all of the reducers that we make. But we will need a case, and in this one, we are going to make use of the got monsters case. But does anything change? Are we still going to return this state now that our state is an array and action.monsters is also going to be an array? What may change here instead of having an object with the monsters key? What may change here? Because remember, we now have this big one, but this monsters reducer is only dealing with the array. Yeah, so you no longer actually need this entire thing because you don't care about any other piece of state. Your entire state is the array. So if you have a new array, you might as well replace the array. If you have a new array, you might as well replace the array. And I'll give a moment for us to look at that. Yep. This entire file's job, this whole monsters.js file's job is to change the value of whatever this key value pair is going to be. So the monsters reducer job is to change the array that belongs to this piece of state. That's all it's going to do. That's all that is relevant here. So whenever we make changes down here, we are no longer dealing with an object with an array. We're dealing with just the array itself. You could optionally do something like this, sort of return state and action.monsters. But this will not do what you want because you are going to just add on to the list that already exists there, which is not right. You want to replace the entire list with the new monsters that you have received. G?
No, so I just wanted to make sure now that you answer is that every time that we're fetching for those monsters, we're getting an updated list anyway. So
Mhm.
we don't need to update it ourselves because fetching is already doing it for us, right?
What do you mean by updated list for where?
Every time that we request from Axios,
Yeah.
we are getting an updated list, even though we are doing other stuff in the other sites, but we are getting the list
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
So we're just literally passing the same data to the reducer
Yeah.
as Acrobat monsters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That is correct. Okay. Any other questions right now about how we created this new smaller reducer that only dealt with an array as a value instead of the object? We are then going to do the same thing, but for the selected monsters reducer. So now in selected monster, we'll move everything that belongs to selected monster in here. So these action types and action creators will go in here. And we will have to also make a reducer. So export default selected monster reducer, which accepts an action state and action, adds in our switch case, and its default is going to be our current state. And now we also add the other switch case that is relevant just for selected monster, which is going to be our got selected monster. And the same way that we now are not dealing with a big object with many different keys, we're only dealing with one object, right? This is now dealing with one object, which means our initial state should also be the object that we have here. And our return value will be the return value that we were expecting from the previous reducer, like so. Claudia says, can we go over the switch case again? Emily, yes, the initial state is also going to be the object that represents the selected monster. And Claudia says, can we go over the switch case again? Yeah. By switch case, do you mean this one here, Claudia? Okay, cool. So we know that we are going to check against its type. All of our actions are objects that have a type property. The default value that we are going to return if we don't match on any case is going to be the state that we started off with. That means nothing changed. Otherwise, if we matched on the got selected monster type, then we want to update this state with the selected monster that I have received. And we can give the entire thing back because now all we're doing is changing this state is the entire selected monster. That's all that it is. There are no other pieces involved. It's just the monster itself. Which means this is no longer necessary because we already removed got selected monster, so we don't need this anymore. And we won't need this reducer anymore because it gets created from here. So with this in mind, I'm going to move this one down here actually so that we can see both of them. Like so, like so. Are there any thoughts and questions about where this came from or how we got here? I assume the answer is yes, and yet unsure of where those questions would be, or what those questions would be. Yeah, you can scroll up in monsters. I can actually put monsters over here for now and put index.js over here. I'm lost, but not sure where. Yeah, Emily, go ahead.
So I have two questions.
Mhm.
The first one is, so I guess the point of kind of breaking things up like this is to kind of keep our code a little bit cleaner, because like we have like in the monsters one, the monsters.js one, there's a lot more code going on
Mhm.
before we hit the reducer than in our selected monsters one.
Right.
So is that kind of just part of the reason we're doing this, is to help keep things cleaner when we have like a much larger scale?
Yeah, yeah. Part of it is because your index.js file would become extremely large, and that's
Right.
harder to handle.
Hmm.
The other part of this is so that you can focus on working with isolated pieces of data.
Hmm.
So
So
instead of, and yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say to kind of help with like debugging, I'm guessing.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
If you think about your Redux groceries, you can see that actually, we can actually pull this up in here. Let's go over to is the solution in here? Redux, nope. Redux groceries. If you go inside of your store.js and you look down here, all of a sudden we have so much more effort in our side of this one reducer. This reducer is now handling a number of different things that you might not need to. Like this visibility filter has no effect on your groceries. So maybe it would have been easier to put this in a separate file and let it handle just the visibility and not have to be in the same file as all these other groceries.
Mm.
Mhm.
So the second question I have, and I might be jumping ahead a little bit, is when we have our kind of mega reducer function.
Yeah.
Is that essentially building kind of like our new state? Because we're in our smaller ones, we're kind of breaking up individual pieces of state.
Mhm.
But is our like state as a whole still living in like our index.js, and we're kind of sending in these little bits of it and then changing it
Yeah.
or updating it?
Yeah. So if we were to make this new reducer, or sorry, make a store with our new giant reducer, we can
Hmm.
take a look at what the store state looks like, right? So we can do that first. Right now I'm going to save this and it's going to rebundle. And I think we will have an error that I will fix. So I'm going to refresh here. We should error out, yes, because my main.js file is still trying to reference the thunk, which is now not in store, but inside of store monsters. So if I refresh on this page, after we have rebundled, hello, please rebundle. There we go. My state right now is the same state that we originally had inside of index.js. So this state, oh, I'm so sorry for making these changes so much. This state right here is the same state, right? Like monsters, empty array, selected monster, object. The same initial state is here. I've just moved the logic into smaller little reducers instead. Yes. Kayla.
In the index.js for our reducer or our combined reducers, how do we use the key or the keys monsters and select monster? I understand that they point to the separate reducers, but do we use monsters and select monster anywhere else inside our project?
Yes, so this is still going to create this initial state, right, that we are looking at. And nowhere in our Redux files will we worry about this, but in our main.js file, this references the store state, and that doesn't change. This is still going to say state.monsters, the same way that it did back when we had a one large reducer.
Cool, thank you.
Cool, yes. Cool. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to stop sharing for a second and I'm going to reshare. I'm going to re-spotlight myself and I'm going to remove my background. Backgrounds and filters. Here we go. So what I wanted to show us, I'm going to erase this as well. Okay, so what we had initially was this initial state. Which had monsters as an array and selected monster as an object. We had one reducer that handled all of this logic, which was fine. And now as things get larger, what we can do instead is have one reducer handle this logic, which is the monsters reducer, so that I will only have to worry about this array of objects. I don't have to worry about my selected monster at all. And I'll have a separate one that references the selected monster. So what we did was took everything that was in one file, pulled out all of the relevant pieces of actions for monsters into one file, and then everything relevant to select monsters into another file. We'll run both of these reducers. We're making a giant one out of these, and it's going to behave the same way that we currently have it set up before. All we did was move files, and what we kind of did here in combined reducers was allowed us to, we did something very similar to an express router, an app.use. We now say, oh, if I am dispatching an action, let me check in my monsters reducer to see if any of these actions match, then I will make changes. If not, let me see if there's anything in here that matches and makes changes. But this as a whole doesn't change. The full functionality does not change. And I will share my screen again so that we can see that in addition to this. And give us a couple of minutes to think about any thoughts or questions. This was us refactoring the code that we already had into new files and made use of subreducers the way that we do with express.router.
Sarah,
Mhm.
did you commented out anything else below that line 13?
So I commented out initial state as well as the reducer. And Emily, yes, we're breaking up our code into smaller, more manageable pieces to make it easier to read and debug. That's correct. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up for I understand what we're trying to accomplish, but I want to test this out in code because the coding portion and the implementation may be confusing. Can I get a go slower for I'm not really sure of what the purpose of this is and or the code part is also confusing? Can I get a go faster for I'm here with it, let's go and let's combine everything into different subreducers. Let's combine all of our subreducers. Okay, okay. All right, so what we were able to do here is in our ability to combine reducers, this becomes the initial state that we had before, but be aware that this could be called anything, right? If I instead call this, instead of monsters, I call this aliens, let's say, and now it's called aliens, what would I have to change in order to be mapped correctly on my React side? If I change this to aliens, what does that look like on my React side? And or how does this change my initial state? Yeah, yes, we would definitely error out right now. And the reason is also based on Lauren. This state.monsters is what this monsters originally was. So if I'm changing this key, I have to make sure that my React components also change. So this should also say aliens in order for me to load this properly. So I refresh on this page. After I rebundle, we can see that aliens is what is in my store. And I want to map it to the monsters prop. Aliens was the initial state in my store, and I want to make sure I map it properly to monsters in my props. The last thing I'm going to close out of this. Oh yeah, G, go ahead.
Is there going to be a moment that we're going to have to connect monster and selected monsters at once? Like, are we going to have to import one to the other, or are they already connected and we can just call them in each other?
Say that one more time.
So let's say I want to use monster.js in selected monster.js. Should I have to import as well, or they're already connected?
So your question is sort of like if something in here is relevant to here.
Yeah.
Yes, the answer is that may happen. That could happen. That might happen in your upcoming lab, sort of. And you will only need to export what you need. You very likely won't ever have your reducers affecting each other. Your reducers won't have an effect on each other, but maybe you use the same action creator or action constant in 2 places, or action creator in 2 places, in which case you can export one or the other, however you like. Bless you, Anshu. She's like, how did you know? Secrets. Okay. So the last thing that I want to walk through is going to be this idea of a loading state. What do I mean by that? I'm going to fake something, and I'm going to fake a very long database call, very long database / server call. So I'm going to add a set timeout here, which is to say, oh, let's say that our call to our server takes like 3 seconds. So unfortunate. I'm gonna, yeah, dispatch, there we go. There. So if it takes 3 seconds and I refresh on this page, did I rebundle? No, there we go. We'll see at the moment that there's nothing going on my page until after those 3 seconds happens. I can then reset my state or re-render based off my state change. When something like this happens and it takes a while to update for any reason, I don't want my user to see this blank page, right? That could indicate that something is broken. That could indicate that I don't have any monsters maybe, but I want to let my users know, hey, hold on, things are fine. It's just kind of loading for a while. I want to let them know that I am loading, And we can do that here because now that we have isolated into a reducer that only deals with monsters, I can say, okay, let's change this state a little bit so that I can include a Boolean that says, hey, I'm currently loading. So we're going to build an initial state for our monsters that includes the monsters array and also it is loading Boolean that says I'm loading. And so now we can replace this with initial state. And it is now a little bit nested, which is unfortunate, but we also only have to deal with is loading inside of this one file, nowhere else. Which means I have to change this got monsters to what? Now that I have received my monsters, how should I change this state? What should I do instead? Spread. Yeah, now I can bring this back. I can spread out my state and say that my monsters are the updated monsters. And what about the is loading state? Yeah, now we're done loading. We don't have to load anymore. With that in mind, now that we have this nested state, this means that in index.js, my actual initial state looks like this. Aliens is this object, right? Because it's no longer an array, and I have the selected monster object. Because it looks like this, what do I have to do in my map state in order to still map correctly? Monsters has to map to the monsters inside of my initial state. How do I map this correctly? Yeah, now aliens relates to this nested object, so I have to access the monsters property. And I also want is loading, so I want to access state.aliens.isLoading as well. What do I want to do then? I want to say if I'm loading, then I want to return a div that says loading, hold up. Maybe let's make this like an H1. And then otherwise, if it's not loading, I will have it load the monsters. So now if I refresh on this page, we'll be able to see the loading hold up H1 tag for a bit, and then afterward it will transform into the monsters array. We can see this nested object here. And that marks the remainder of this lecture. This is loading portion is relevant only for your JPFP and not for the exercise this afternoon. Our main takeaway is being able to take our giant reducer that we had here and split it up into smaller ones, So now I'm going to